Welcome back to the show. Welcome back to Space Explorer. It's been a while since I did an interview with somebody. And again, I'm happy to come back into doing interviews right now with a very special guest on today's show. Obviously, her name is Jas Purewal. So she has a master's degree in physics or astrophysics. She has been working as a researcher and scientist for over 10 years and currently works as a senior scientist for a UK national lab. So during her career, she has also worked with several US national labs. In 2020, during the pandemic, Jas built a low-fidelity space dome, which of course we're going to talk about a lot, as you've probably seen it by the title of the video, and conducted her own solo space analog mission, the first of its kind in the UK, spaceexplorer.co.uk, which is going to be linked right there below. And by the way, I love the name. Jas is the co-creator of the Analog Astronaut Community, analogastronautcommunity.mn.co. Of course, is going to be linked as well, which was launched earlier this year with the first International Analog Astronaut Conference. The next one is coming up soon. Jas enjoys traveling, is a certified scuba diver and private pilot. Very cool. She's regularly plays tennis and has recently started learning the guitar, which I don't know if we're gonna explore that part, if she's just gonna be playing some tunes for us today, but I'm sure that's very awesome as well. So again, thank you so much for the time, and looking forward to diving deep into the discussion.
Thank you so much, Martinez. It's really great to be here with you today.
Thank you, much appreciated. And again, had to give the shout out to Darsh D. Jas made the connection, yeah. So he's a great guy. I know he's a moderator in Analog Community as well on the platform, so he's doing a phenomenal job. So I want to ask you first of all, as I'm, kind of asked you before we started recording, like, can you give us a little bit more, maybe even background on yourself? How did you start it? How did you start it? How did you came about to have a master's degree in physics with a spin in astrophysics, plus Analog Astronaut Conference and the platform? Where was the idea? Where did it kind of came from?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, if I go back to the first question, which is my degree, I think like a lot of people, I actually was kind of unsure as to what direction to go in when it went to choosing the actual course at university. I never had any doubts that I wanted to go to university. I just wasn't sure like what I should study. I always had this love for space. I had this love for space since a small child. I think my parents are kind of always been science-minded. They used to watch science documentaries on the television. They used to watch Star Trek, the original series in the background. I think they were like teenagers when that used to, or they used to be at university when that first came out in the 60s. So it was always a sort of part of my life growing up. And when I was 11, we went to, not 11, sorry, when I was 9, we went to Florida for Disney World and also to the Kennedy Space Center. And that's the first time I can really remember looking at space and thinking, wow, like this is the ultimate adventure. And I think I don't know, I always had a bit of an explorer spirit in me, and it really spoke to that. And I remember really clearly, I still have this image of this person dressed up as an astronaut, and he had this gold visor that you couldn't see through. And I just thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And then obviously being like toured around the actual Kennedy Space Center, it was just something that really stuck with me forever, I think. And it still sticks with me even now. And so because of that, I always had this love for space, but I wasn't really sure if you could make a career out of that. And certainly being based in the UK, we don't have the same kind of national space program that you have in the US. There's the European Space Agency, obviously, that the UK is involved in and does a lot of great work with like satellites and other space research. But manned space flight is something that isn't very prominent here in the UK. So I never really thought that this was something I could, my dream of being an astronaut was really something that was maybe achievable or attainable, but it was always there in the back of my mind as a dream. So when it came to choosing the degree, I was tossing between ideas of like medicine or like aerospace engineering, something where I was thinking I'd get a good solid job at the end of the day. And then I just remember one of my teachers, a PE teacher of all things, sports teacher, giving me some careers advice. And she said, do what you're passionate about. Don't worry about the job at the end of the day. Just pick the degree that you think that you're going to enjoy the most. And so I took her advice and I went for astrophysics or physics with astrophysics. And I'm glad I did. I did enjoy the degree very much. at the end of the degree, of course, I was left thinking, well, now what? Again, how do I use this astrophysics degree to become an astronaut? And I actually did think about joining the Royal Air Force, becoming an a fighter pilot, because that is one of the traditional routes into becoming an astronaut. For sort of family reasons, I was very much discouraged out of that. My parents were very much sort of like, you don't want to join the military, don't do this. And because of that, really, I never pursued that dream. And I wouldn't say regrets, but you never know what could have happened if you had actually gone down one of these routes that you were exploring when you were young. And as a result, though, after graduating, I thought to myself, well, I've spent 4 years studying this degree. I want to actually use what I've learned. So I ended up, almost by pure chance, applying to the job of a research scientist, and got the job, and actually never looked back since. I really enjoy it, really enjoy what I've been doing. And then sort of leading on to your second question about the Analog Astronaut Community. So that was a much more recent discovery of mine. So I actually only discovered the term analog astronaut in 2020. So a very recent discovery for me. And when I did come across this, I was like, I can't believe this exists. This is amazing. This is like an opportunity for everyday people who aren't necessarily involved in the space industry to, not just play astronaut, but genuinely like contribute in their way if they can. And when I was sort of learning a bit more about it in 2020, it was actually, the pandemic had kicked off as well. And I came across Cyan, so Dr. Cyan Proctor. And I think I'm sure everybody knows who Cyan is by now. She used to be on Facebook doing something called Space Snacks. And I was watching her Space Snacks series, and I just was like so impressed with the work she was doing at that time, her enthusiasm, just her kind of charisma came across. And I just thought, this woman is amazing. I really need to sort of reach out to her and just have a conversation with her, find out more about what she's up to. So I did. I reached out to her. We had a conversation, we had a chat. And at that time, because I was thinking about applying to the actual analog habitats that exist around the world, there's lots of them. I was looking at lunares at the time, thinking about high seas. Because of the pandemic, it wasn't possible to actually go on any of these. So at the point when I was speaking to Cyan, I already had in the back of my mind that if I couldn't go to an analog, maybe I should do my own analog. And so I told her my idea and what I was doing. And I got the sort of idea of what the habitat was going to look like. And I started talking to her about my habitat idea design. And I was going to build this habitat in my back garden and all of these things. And I think she probably to herself was thinking, who is this crazy woman in Britain doing these things? And but she was really enthusiastic about it. I think she liked the idea. She wanted to support me. She was amazing with that. And so she kind of became an advisor. And she also put me in touch with some other very, very useful and handy, very cool people. So I ended up talking to Dr. Shauna Pandya as well, who you've probably heard of, is, again, very, very prominent in like the analog astronaut community, but also does lots of really, really cool work. And so I got her to sort of advise me as well. And I also spoke to some other people as well involved in the analog astronaut community, and really got, in a very short space of time, a fantastic introduction to the world of the analog astronauts and analog habitats and all of that.
That's fantastic. And by the way, I'm just looking at the image on your Instagram, UK Space Explorer, that of course, for everybody who is watching or listening to this episode, you're going to find a link to that Instagram, and you can go and take a look at this image that I'm looking right now, back to October 7th, 2020. So I'm looking at this dome structure tent, habitat, right? So, and I see you with your hands up like that, with the helmet on, just excited, right? So this is really cool. I mean, so can you talk about where is this project? I mean, do you still have the habitat currently? Because that's been built in your backyard, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I do have the habitat. It's dismantled. So one of the things that so there's a few considerations that I was thinking about when building this. One was cost effectiveness, but the other was actually portability. One of the things in the back of my mind as I was doing this was really how can you make this sort of experience accessible to other people, and how can you make it geographically accessible, I suppose, as well. So the cost effectiveness obviously was one, and the other was being able to transport it around if you needed to, taking it to different locations. And so, yes, it's very easy to put up and it's very easy to take down. It takes like 45 minutes to take down. It takes maybe just an hour and a half or 2 hours to put up. One person can do it. And that's taking your time with it as well. So it's currently sitting part in the shed and part in the garage.
Right, gotcha. So can we talk about just your analog mission process? Did you craft the analog mission yourself? How did your regular days look like? Did you really just stayed all the time in the habitat? Did you came back home? So I mean, how does everything look like for you, and what did you do during that time?
Excuse me. Yeah, so I did craft the whole sort of experience for myself, what I wanted to get out of the mission, what my mission objectives were, how I sort of designed each and every day. I knew I definitely wanted to do some EVAs, so extravehicular activities. There's no way I was going to spend the full time trapped in this dome with no natural light, not being able to look outside at all. EVAs, I think, if you speak to a lot of people that have conducted analog missions, are one of the most enjoyable parts of the mission. So that was factored in. If you do see some of these pictures, you'll notice I'm wearing like a helmet, and I have my flight suit, which again is just effectively just a jumpsuit, but it does represent. So the idea of all of this is, obviously it is low fidelity, but each and everything has to represent what it would be like in a real mission. So although it's just a motorcycle helmet, it represents your astronaut helmet, right? So every time you step outside the dome, which is my habitat, I had to make sure I was wearing all of this. So in terms of mission objectives, I had sort of the main ones were really just studying my own response to this. So it was very much a very isolated mission. At no point did I have any contact with anyone in the house. I didn't go into the main house. In terms of bathroom facilities, there is a toilet on the back of the house, which is away from like the rest of it. So that's what I used for that, because I did consider compost toilets and all of this thing, but then kind of came to the conclusion that that's at the back. So it's kind of isolated away from everyone else. So that was the only contact I had to go near the house. And what's surprising about it is, even though I'm literally in my own back garden, once you're in the actual dome habitat, it feels like you could be like thousands of miles away. It really was isolating. So studying that sort of the psychological effects was really interesting for me personally. And then the other things that I was very much sort of thinking about was outreach. And one of the things that I did was reach out to some of the community members, some of the people who were already analog astronauts. I did an analog astronaut series on YouTube where I interviewed them, had conversations with them, just kind of bringing to a bit of attention to what analog astronauts do, what analog habitats are, what analog missions are, because I think just like me, a lot of people aren't actually aware of this. It's not something that's actually very well known. So I was trying to bring a little bit of awareness there. And then also some outreach to children through these online classes. So I reached out to Janet's Planet, and we did a couple of classroom sessions with her kids, and also through Cyan, she was doing some classroom activity. I think it was called Dexter. And so I also did a class with her as well. And that was, really, it was not only enjoyable, but it was quite satisfying in the way that, especially with one of Janet's Planet students, she actually reached out to me afterwards and she said she was so inspired by it. And for me, that was like incredible. It was just like, wow, I've actually inspired a child. This is amazing. And it kind of makes you feel good about what you're doing. It makes it feel like, you're on the right track and you inspire one child, and it kind of, makes it all worthwhile. And also these online classes were the only time I sort of broke with the rule of having a communications delay as well. So I did factor in a communications delay, as you would have in reality. Not that I was really communicating too much with many people during this, because one of the key things to think about was the isolation. So there was some very interesting outcomes regarding that for me.
Yes.
One of which I was just like really surprised about was my complete inability to relax. I don't normally have this problem. I'm not one of these people who brings work home with me or is always thinking about work. So for me, this was very new and very surprising. And when I spoke to Alex Hoffman, who is the crew psychologist for the Austrian Space Forum, she wasn't at all surprised. So this is like quite a common reaction, I think, to being put in an uncomfortable situation, also being isolated, just kind of turning into a bit of a workaholic during that time to keep your mind busy and active at all times.
Right. So how long did the mission last for? How many days?
So the mission itself was 7 days, and each day I had various activities planned. So I didn't have my first EVA until the day 3. I built a little nanosat one day. I built a little mini Mars rover, and so there was activities planned throughout each day, but there was also room for flexibility. As you know, most things you find that things take longer or not as long than you expected. Building the mini Mars rover took an extra half a day longer than I thought it would. So I took that out on my EVA. And obviously, like I said, some of these outreach things also took up some of that time. And then factoring in relaxation time, which I didn't use in the end, and also exercise time, food. So I had all my food and water with me. I took in milk bottles filled with tap water for the duration that I needed. Had my freeze-dried food as well. Had some freeze-dried insects, which I wanted to try out. And yeah, so 7-day duration for the mission.
So what would you say you learned the most out of this 7-day mission for yourself?
Oh gosh, I mean, I learned a lot of things. I learned some things about myself, like I mentioned already, the surprise that I couldn't stop working. To me, that's really interesting, I guess, because just from a personal point of view, I found that interesting. I'm not, I know meditation is something that a lot of people do these days. I'm not somebody who actually does that, but I noticed that, you know, people talk about being present a lot. And what you find if you're in a slightly uncomfortable situation like I was, that your mind is very present. You're concerned very much with your current situation and circumstances. And again, just these sort of things were interesting for me, my own sort of response to them. Building the actual habitat itself was so enjoyable. It was such a fantastic exercise to actually build something with your own hands. It really is something that I think I encourage people to do, because that sense of like achievement when you actually construct something like that. And it wasn't without its problems. Like being in the UK, it rains a lot here. It was actually one of the wettest weeks that we had. And so I was getting some leaks by the door, which, you know, luckily I just put like a towel there, and that seemed to be good enough to keep the water away. But there were, you know, habitat maintenance, which I think, you know, is important for real missions as well, was very important for my mission. Some of the other things I guess I took away from it were how to best sort of design your mission as well. Like, or the things you need to factor into your day-to-day design, the kind of research that you're interested in doing. What it gave me an opportunity to do was really study the kind of research that that people do on analog missions, the sort of things that we can do if we want to actually contribute to these missions. So I've been looking at various research experiments that I could do when I, you know, do go to places like Lunaris, High Seas, MDRS, and all of those. Is what can you do that might have an impact in this area of research that people are doing? So that was really useful for me as well to learn more about that. And the connections I made with the analog community, obviously, which led to, you know, creating the actual community website and then this conference. So that was amazing.
That is amazing. So the question before we move on, is there a Space Explorer mission number 2 coming as well? Or as you speak on to other habitats out there, the ones who are existing, is that going to be the next thing for you personally?
So the next one is going to be existing habitats. I do, however, very much want to conduct another one using my own habitat as well, and I would like to actually involve other people in that. So that is something, but that is something for, I think, much further in the future at the moment. But yeah, that was always the plan. Hence the, you know, like I mentioned, the portable habitat, always thinking about how to include people who maybe wouldn't even consider this as a possibility for them. So those are the kind of people who might not have thought that they could actually do this, I'd like to introduce them to it in a really sort of non-threatening, easy way, and then hopefully like spark something in them to get them excited about this area of research and work.
Right. Very interesting. So speaking about, again, these existing current analog stations out there, obviously probably too hard of a question to ask, but still probably you're just one of the people inside of the community. You have connections within those communities with those analog stations, as you mentioned, high seas, MDRS, and Lunaris as well. So I want to ask you a question about just moving further into the future. Like, what would you say you would like to see in the future habitats as you kind of created your own? You see what's needed, what could be done potentially, to improve things. So what would you say, without obviously being right now in one of these stations, what would you say like you would love to see in the future habitats coming up near soon?
So I think what's brilliant about the existing habitats is that they are all very unique in their, like, the location they're in, the landscape. So in terms of like thinking about EVAs and making it feel like you're actually on Mars or the moon, is, each and every one of them has its own unique location, and so it very much feels like you are on another planet. In terms of their habitat design improvement, I wouldn't presume to be able to offer them my sort of advice on that. I think there's people out there with far greater experience than me. Having said that, I think there's a lot of value in the low fidelity side. However, I also think that some of these more up and coming high fidelity missions, so the SAM habitat that they're building at Biosphere 2 in Arizona, is a really good future sort of approach to this. It's completely hermetically sealed. I think moving towards these sort of habitat designs that are even closer to what we'll call like the real thing is the direction that we should be moving in. And I think that's fantastic. In terms of inside the existing habitats, so my personal interest is the like the lab space. So I guess because I am very much interested in the research side, I do think that's that's why we're doing this. We're studying what we can before we can go into space. I think any way that the habitats can improve their sort of research lab space it would be amazing. They've already got, a lot of them have like their hydroponics, 3D printing, engineering. If you can expand and build on those, then that would be the sort of direction I'd be looking in.
Fantastic. So I'm on the same page with you. And obviously there's, from my side, I see there's many other pieces we're missing. Again, without saying that analog missions are bad, like everybody plays a crucial part in this realm, because everybody adds their own value the way they can, possibly with the circumstances that they have, which is like fine. But as we speak in the future, we need to create something more realistic, which means, better stations, better equipment, better laboratories that go with that. What do you think about having, again, a proposition as from NASA that was to have a crews of 7 people, right? 7 people, 8 people, kind of, that's the rough number, right? Would you believe that, again, we continue to move into the future and we talk about space sustainability and, again, living as multi-planetary species, let's say on Moon and Mars? Would you believe that the bigger crew missions would be needed also on these stations, or we should continue to go with 7?
I actually think it depends on the station size, right? So if we're talking about a lunar habitat that you're going to be, is like a large habitat, like a base, a lunar base, then I think absolutely you want larger crews, because it depends, you need to fill that space, as it were. If we're talking about the existing kind of crewed missions, like let's say you're sending your first mission to Mars, from what I understand, there's like an optimal crew size based upon a lot of human factor studies that the NASA and ESA and lots of space agencies have done. And I could be wrong, but I believe it's around sort of the number of about 6 people. Larger crews, I think, are useful when settling in bases. So that's kind of my opinion on this. But I think we need to be researching that, because that's the direction we're headed in. We are thinking about putting a lunar base on the moon. So we should be definitely studying these larger crew dynamics, because that's what we're going to end up with when we end up on the moon, when we end up with if eventually on the Mars, we end up with a Mars base as well.
Right. So how would you personally envision those first settlements on the moon and Mars? I mean, what difficulties do you think that will come up, again, besides the psychological aspects and, conflict and the kind of the obvious ones? What do you think there's going to be kind of the other point for us to pay attention and to solve in here in analog missions before we're going to go there?
I mean, I actually think a lot of the difficulties they're going to have more so is going to be the actual environment and the engineering, the settling, the extreme environment they're going to be in. Not to sort of rule out the sort of human factors, the psychological side of it as well. I mean, that plays into that. But we can definitely study a lot of that extreme environment conditions here on Earth. So we take, if we take a crew to a very, very hostile extreme environment on Earth and give them an exercise to try something as simple as like construct a habitat in this extreme environment. You could really go right back to sort of a basic study of you take, they have a transport vehicle, they arrive, they have the materials they need, they have to construct a habitat in a very hostile environment here on Earth. And that is going to be a fantastic way of sort of studying how the crew manages to overcome, these sort of difficult conditions, how they work together. And what we all want to know, of course, is how they respond when things go wrong, because things are always going to go wrong in any kind of extreme and hostile environment. A really good way of doing that on Earth is, we obviously do have plenty of difficult and extreme environments on ground, but we also have underwater. And so there are some now analog missions, or there always was NEMO with NASA, but there's a lot of new and up and coming analogs where they're actually doing underwater analogs now. And I think that is one of the best ways of replicating an actual space mission. I mean, all the space agency use underwater training for their astronauts, but it is genuinely, obviously, anyone who's gone scuba diving knows that it's a very dangerous environment to be in. And so that's another fantastic way of sort of studying this here on Earth. And they've got underwater caves that you can utilize for that sort of study as well. You are going to get all the issues with sort of the psychological side of things that you'll be able to look at, and you're also going to get a lot of the sort of operational difficulties that you would get in an extreme environment that you could look at.
Right. So what would you say, again, from the kind of medical and physical aspects, like how we can tackle, I mean, is there a way for us, to conduct research or work in research here on Earth to tackle some of the problems when it comes to handling microgravity and, muscle and bone loss? I mean, is there any sort of a research is being done on analogs right now to that degree, or this is mainly focused on isolation studies and any sort of a different research?
So in terms of the analog habitats at the moment that are studying or missions, isolation studies is something obviously that they've done, psychological factors, as we've discussed. In terms of like physical effects from microgravity, it's a much harder thing to study here in an analog habitat, because how do you replicate that? Yeah. But I know there have been some studies, NASA's done studies where, and the difficulty, of course, in this is the kind of ethical side of things, because some of these studies have involved, people just laying in bed for great extended periods of time. And so you're looking at, the muscle atrophy, which you can study. Obviously, if you're not physically active, your muscles will atrophy, and you can study that side of it. Bone density, that's a slightly harder thing to study, but even bone density, if you're not doing any kind of impact movements, it is going to affect your bone density as well. So to a lesser degree, I think you can study that in an analog habitat as well. I obviously don't have a medical background, so I'm just sort of expressing sort of my own opinions here on what I think is possible. But again, I think underwater habitat studies might provide a good route into this again, because you have that sort of simulated floating, I suppose, as you would of microgravity, but you still have the gravity of Earth, which is not something that we can obviously remove here, on Earth doing these analog studies. You've got the zero-G flights where you can study very, very short periods of time, which they do. I think you can do that with plants, with microorganisms, which is another fantastic way of entering into like the biological effects of microgravity. So I think there's a lot that you can do here on Earth, but it's going to be limited, is what I would say, I suppose.
So how much of that, as you talked about, and again, I've seen the photo of the cute rover that you put together in during your mission. How much do you believe robotics is going to be helping us on those missions on Moon and Mars?
I love this question because actually people have asked this to me a few times, and what I always say is that I think robots are essential in our future space exploration, but as a supplement, as an addition to human exploration. There is, in my mind, no way that robots are going to replace human space exploration. I think what they do is, just like here, right here on Earth, like they help make our lives easier, but they're not a substitute for what a human being can do in terms of exploring space. I mean, I love robot technology. I love the way it's developing, but we're still not quite there yet if we're talking about sending robots out instead of people. I think in the future, they're going to be fantastic to be like the first to be sent out there. Maybe they could actually start constructing the habitat, and then the humans arrive later, and the astronauts arrive and do the difficult human tasks.
Yes, exactly. So, right. So speaking about, again, coming back to the settlement, just a quick question. When do you think, again, we should expect, as a lot of people ask me, you know, through social media, okay, so when the first settlement, when we're going to have the first people, I'm not talking about the close one, kind of moon mission, but Mars mission. When do you envision that's going to happen? Are we talking about next 20, 30, 50 years? What's your personal projection?
So what are we now? Almost 2022. I mean, I don't know, but I'd like to think that we'll be headed towards Mars by 2030. Now, I think a lot of people think it'll be sooner than that. A lot of people think it might be never, but I'm going to go with 2030 as my guess. I think things often can take longer than you think they're going to take. I think we're going to have space stations around the Earth for humans, like, you know, the orbital assembly, those kind of guys who are doing the gravity, the ones which are going to have artificial gravity on. I think those will be up there by probably 2030 as well. So I really, maybe I'm just hopefully thinking by 2030 there'll be a lot more of these in space, and then from those we'll be able to launch more missions to places like Mars and have habitat.
Well, I hope that's what's going to happen, you know, in that case.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, exactly, because we need that, and it seems like we're moving towards that direction, and that's why I asked you the question about just the timeline, because again, everybody has different views, and, you know, again, depending where they at, where they work in an industry, how close they are to those certain companies where they initiating those projects, but yeah, this seems very reasonable. Being 10, 20 years, it's kind of, you know, where I would imagine humans starting to kind of settle on Mars, or at least to do a little bit of research and come back. But through that, again, for me personally, it's all about doing that, compressing the timelines, which means going faster. And I think that's why analog missions play a crucial part in that. I mean, into kind of sustainability side, right? Because there's a lot of unknown factors still. And again, NASA or ESA or JAXA will have their hands full, as they always do. So getting more people involved on these projects, just like yourself, getting this, you know, dome tent structure and building that at your backyard, and, you know, doing an analog mission yourself to understand the fidelities and how the mission should work, what problems will arise during that. I mean, this is very important. So what would you say, again, through, as you have obviously the platform Analog Community, how people are, or even myself, can communicate this even better, to tell people like, look, you should get involved with this. Or I'm not talking with analog missions. If you want to do that in your home background, hey, talk with Jas, and I'm pretty sure she will help you a lot with that. But science communication, how we all who are part of this can do better and get more people involved into kind of shortening the timelines.
Yeah, and I think that's you bring up some really good points there. And when it comes to science communication, I think you need to, if you're communicating to the masses, not the people who are already enthusiastic and excited about space, then you need to make it relatable to them. One of the questions that people who, you know, friends, family who don't necessarily have an interest in space ask me is, well, why should they care? Why should they care about the fact that we're going into space and we're doing these things? And, you know, you can approach that answer from numerous different ways. I usually sort of tell them sometimes about some of the technologies that have come out of space research that they're using right now here every day on Earth, or the most obvious ones you can talk about is satellites, right? Everybody understands that we use satellites a lot, but at the moment, we're all talking about sustainability. It's one of our biggest concerns right now on Earth. How can we be more sustainable? So we're talking about issues for Earth. And actually, one of my favorite quotes that Cyan has said is, when we solve for space, we solve for Earth. And I think her quote there is spot on, right? Whenever we're pushing the boundaries of our research, of what we can achieve and what we can do, some of the solutions we come up with benefit us right here, right now on Earth. And actually, the conference that you mentioned, the next conference that we're having, the Analog Astronaut Conference next year in May, is very much focused on how can space research benefit us here on Earth, and how can analog research obviously contribute towards that. So that's the focus of that conference, for the very reason that we want to make it relatable to as many people as possible. I think most people would agree climate change is a big concern. Sustainability is something we need to be thinking about. So then how is it that space can help with that? Well, if we're talking about right now in space, you have to look at like circular systems, even on the ISS. How can you use these circular systems to keep things, like recycle things as much as possible? When living on the moon, when living on Mars, how are you going to cope with extremely hostile environments where everything you have is limited? You have limited resources, and how are you going to best utilize those limited resources? Whatever we decide, what solutions we come up with are going to then also be applicable right here on Earth, where again we do have limited resources, even though we've been behaving in the past as though we had infinite resource. We're now starting to realize, of course, we don't, and we do need to think about sustainability. And I think that's a really, really good direction of conversation to take this into, because I think most people are concerned about sustainability these days. So if you start telling them that, look, space research is contributing towards this, I think, they're interested, as well as some of the cool technology. I think people are quite interested in that as well.
Right. So the question that I also have is about, we talk about the sustainability and space for all, hashtag space for all. Obviously, that's been put out there. And again, now we having kind of commercial crews, again, with just Inspiration 4, the one that, put everybody off is like, oh my God, there's just regular people flying into space, right? Like we see the orbit flights that are being done, Virgin Galactic or Blue Origin, but like orbiting the planet for a few days, that's really, really cool. I mean, I just can't wait to talk with Sam and just ask, what is the feeling like? I mean, it's obviously probably will be like, look, you have to do it yourself to probably understand. But how do we go right now into this place where there's risk and there is commercial spaceflight and there's people, everyday people who would be going into Moon and Mars, again, as we're talking about having bigger crews and, obviously through analog missions, potentially having bigger crews, longer missions, so we can, start to train people and for them to experience what does it feel like, obviously without having vacuum out there, without having, third of the gravity, experiencing that, and obviously having a few more kind of luxury items versus, having that on Mars. How do we don't cross the threshold where there's risk? Meaning analogs like astronaut selection process. How do you envision that is going to look in the future? As again now with Inspiration 4 or any missions that are currently happening right now, we see everyday people are traveling to space. So how do we make sure that everyday people, once they're going to be traveling to Moon and Mars, something bad does not happen just because the threshold is being lowered, because we want people on Mars and people start having the, fatalities through traveling or once in a moments of settlement?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's with the way we've approached everything as people, I suppose, whenever we develop new technologies, whenever we push boundaries, the initial people that go, they're the ones that take the majority of the risk. They're the ones that are pushing the boundaries. And by the time, the sort of regular folks, the average people, when we start to go, they've ironed out a lot of the risk factors. Not to say that there isn't risk, but the margin for risk has been, there's a lot bigger margin. Like, you're not going to have the commercial astronauts or the average people performing similar tasks to the kind of astronauts that have been doing in the past. But also, you know, the thing that you touched upon is training here on Earth. There's already training centers coming up, commercial training centers being planned. You know, this is something that I think is going to become more important in the future. You prepare people for their journey to space. You get them trained up. You get them familiar with what to expect. But like, you know, you still have to send that first highly trained astronaut crew out before you send your average citizen out, so that they can mitigate a lot of the risk factors and prepare that for the average person to go out there. And there's also ways of experiencing space in a less extreme way at the moment. You know, you've got some of these, you know, like worldview space, some of these people who are sending balloons up to like a suborbital level. And it's like baby steps, you know, first you take that step, you get familiar with what it might feel like to actually be up above the Earth and get that view. Then maybe you take them on a smaller mission up into space. You get the feel for microgravity. You take them on like a zero-G flight, and they slowly they become more and more familiar. They know what it's to expect. So that when they do actually go out on that mission, it's going to be a bit more comfortable. They're going to be, you know, trained up for it, so they know what to expect to a certain degree. And I think I'm excited. I think it's going to be absolutely fine. Just like with what we used to do here with, like, you know, airplanes used to be for a limited number of people. Now we're all taking flights all the time, and we get on a plane and we don't think about the risks or anything. We just, you know, we get on that flight and away we go, and we don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. So it feels like, again, the same trajectory, and obviously with just more and more media, because you probably see it yourself. I mean, space is kind of dominating the marketing these days. Also, you see the big brands for, you know, selling clothing or perfume or whatever that is, through kind of this space-like, you know, advertising, because they see, you know, I saw that actually the space industry took off during the COVID, at the start of the pandemic, because I think people just reached out to the closest thing that was to them for them to do something like astrophotography or things like that. So, and a lot of people went into it. A lot of people started podcasts, just like myself. And there was like, okay, look, what's my hobby or thing that I liked that I should maybe go back to kind of exploring, and people just dove into it. So that's where we saw just the number of people to increase, which is great. The momentum is building right now, and it's already there. So let's just keep it going that way. But again, back to kind of sustainability. Sian Proctor, I know she has a book, Meals for Mars Cookbook, right? Yeah. Again, we see a photo, and you can go back and see it on Instagram. Again, Jas was experimenting with insects, right? You know, how does it gonna look like? So how would you describe, I mean, because for everyday average people, we have a certain, you know, just things that we like to eat, and, you know, how do you envision that is gonna look like? That's a big part of human sustainability, right? Like food. So how do you envision that?
Oh, food is so important. I mean, for morale, for your like mood, and just, you know, our cultures are built around like eating, food, rituals, and that kind of thing. I think it's really important. One of the things that I experienced during my mission in my dome was like massive like food fatigue. It was awful. In such a short space of time, I became sick of freeze-dried food, like very, very quickly. I was craving anything fresh, like literally anything. And it was, yeah, and the insects were surprisingly not that bad at all. I'm actually a huge, like, I think it's actually very, very positive to use insects as a protein source for space, because they're so small and portable, all those things anyway. But yeah, I think when it comes to food, we have to think sustainably. We're going to have to, in my opinion, we're going to have to start growing food in space. We can't just keep transporting it to, like at the moment they transport everything to the ISS. I heard someone describe it like NASA kind of treats it as a camping mission in space, right? So you take everything with you.
Well, it's a very expensive camping mission.
Very expensive, probably the most expensive. You know, in the future, you can't keep doing that. You can't just transport all your food up with you where you need it. So you're going to have to start growing things in space. And they're already doing a lot of research into this.
So are we talking? So what are we talking about? Just like in the movie Martian, is it going to be potatoes? Like how we going to start this up?
So some of the guys who I think I talked to from Habitat Marty are really looking into some really great solutions for this. I don't know if it's going to be potatoes growing like in the Martian, but you want these. So a lot of research going into like algae and algae production, which is a really good source of protein as well. Some of these more things that take up less space that are very nutrient dense. You know, these are the kind of things you want to look at. Nutrient density, you can actually genetically engineer things to have more nutrient density than we have here on Earth. You want to look at, you know, reusing sort of bio waste as a way to sort of, you know, you could use human bio waste as a fertilizer for these things so that you're growing. I think you can't just obviously live off potatoes, right? This is the thing that I was talking about with my mission as well as the food fatigue. You know, you're going to get tired very quickly if you have like 3 items that you're growing. There needs to be variety in the diet. There absolutely has to be. And we need to stop being squeamish about insects, in my opinion. Like that's very much a cultural thing. There is no reason why we shouldn't be eating insects as a protein source. We're not exactly going to be able to take actual meat sources with us. Something that I think is really cool and interesting is these synthetic meats that we're engineering here on Earth at the moment. So, you know, the companies like Beyond Meat and those guys, lab-based meats, right? This might be a possibility. I haven't done the research on this. I don't know how much like energy is involved in creating those, if it's feasible to do something like that in space. But if it is, you know, that's another way of sort of generating a protein source for yourself in space. Once you've got your base on Mars or on the moon, then you need to build yourself a sort of like a biosphere, basically, right? It's where you've got your self-contained environment where you will be growing your plants. But then what do you use for soil? What kind of light do you use? How are plants affected by microgravity? All of these questions are things that, you know, we're looking into, we're studying. A lot of companies are looking into these, you know, nutrient dense food sources, you know, like you get camping bars, you get energy bars, all of those things. They're looking at sort of engineering these, but I personally am much more of a fan of fresh grown food. There's only a certain amount of, I don't know, protein bars that a person can eat. And so I think that is going to be really, really important, is growing fresh produce. But for me personally, I'm not sure what the best approach for this is.
Right. So yes, I spoke with a few people, and again, just like in the individual, we had a just long last episode from Habitat Marte when we talked about agriculture in space. So a lot of people were shocked, like agriculture in space. Yes, that's the thing. Just like a space law, it's a thing these days. I mean, that's existing. So so it's going to be very important, because to some degree, again, using algae, it makes a lot of sense. How much, again, you know, taste-wise we can add to algae, I mean, that's a different discussion. I mean, maybe potentially we can, but definitely we need fresh vegetables grown once we're going to be there. So, you know, how are we going to get that, when we're going to get that, is of course a question of time. Again, another thing I want to talk about a little bit, Artemis, which right now is again another mission that was proposed by NASA. Again, we're coming back to the moon. I think that was something like a theme, just like that, like back to the moon. So now things are being delayed. Spacesuits kind of another issue, right? And you know, probably a lot of things in that section too. So do you believe analog stations, just like Austrian Space Forum, because I know they're working on their own next generation spacesuits, do you believe that analog stations could help through private commercial industry to develop next generation spacesuits?
Absolutely. I think there's no reason why they can't. In fact, I think if we're going to be extending to grander projects in space, more people, larger projects, then we need the support of these sort of either analogs or commercial companies to come in and build and design new spacesuits of the future. I think that is a really good approach actually to this.
Right. Gotcha. So that's all I have for today. But look, it's really awesome to hear again, just your personal story that, you know, since the childhood, since you were 9 and your parents took you to the Disneyland and Houston, to see and explore that kind of passion that you got into you, and we see that right now. You know, it's really great, and you know that you follow your journey. As your teacher said, follow your passion and do the thing that you want to study, which again, you ended up doing that. It's really great. And I would encourage everybody, doesn't matter your age, gender, just do that. You know, try to do that. If you feel like space is the thing that you wanted to do, go and do that. Don't quit your job. I don't recommend that, but try to do something on the side. You know, get an analog station attend in your backyard, connect with the people, join the analog community. I mean, become one of the people, and you know, network with people. That's a big thing in this community. The more you network, the more people you know, more advice you can get, and that will lead you to the place that you're meant to be. So can you talk a little bit more about the upcoming analog conference? What is it going to be? How people can be part of it, and the rest?
Yeah, no, everything you said there, I completely agree with. Everyone is welcome to the conference. Everyone is welcome in the analog community. It's a really friendly group, actually. If you do network with people, and it seems like the space community is very open, very inclusive. So yeah, just reiterate everything you said. The Analog Astronaut Conference next year is going to be held at Biosphere 2 in Arizona. It's going to be between May 6th to May 8th. And the tickets are already up for sale, which you can buy at analog-astronaut.com. We've got limited tickets. I think we've got around 50 tickets left. We've got a great speaker lineup as well. So Cyan will be there for you to ask questions, one-to-one questions with her as well. If you want to buy a VIP ticket, you can actually spend some one-to-one time with Cyan as well. The standard ticket includes the full 3 days. You will get to see every speaker session. We've got Frank White, who's the author of The Overview Effect, also speaking. We've got just a variety of people there who are going to be talking about their research, their work. There's going to be discussion sessions, so we're very much encouraging people to attend so that they can have these network and have these great conversations with people. But there's also going to be some fun. There's going to be entertainment, music. There's an art installation as well. So, you know, hopefully we've got everything covered from a variety of different areas. It's not just science, it's not just technology, it's also art, it's also music, which are also very, very important for space missions and analog missions. So yeah, if you want to know more, head on over to analogastronaut.com. If you want to join the community, I think you're going to share the link. You're absolutely welcome to join the community. I highly encourage everyone, like you said, from any background with zero experience in analogs, you can still join the community and learn. So yeah, I encourage people to get in touch with me if you want to. At any point, I can answer your questions as well. We're just really excited to launch the conference. It's going to be the first in-person conference we've done, so it's going to be really great. And it's at such an amazing location. You know, you'll get to go to Biosphere 2, which for me is very exciting because I haven't been there either. And yet you get to stay there overnight as well for the duration of the conference.
Yes, that's amazing. I'm looking forward to that as well. I mean, I do encourage everybody who's listening or watching, get your ticket right now. Make sure you booked in and book in your flight. And, you know, I just can't wait, obviously. Can't wait to meet everybody, you know, in person. That's another thing that's very important for me, obviously. And I think a lot of people will agree. You know, talking online, which it's really great. Sometimes for me, that's even more stressful than talking with somebody in person, you know, still after 130 episodes. So it's really great. And I can't wait for that. And I really want to thank you again for you know, putting that together, because I do understand it's, even though you got some help, just like the Darshdi that I mentioned, probably, you know, and people like that who helping you to put that together, it's still work. It's still a lot of work. And you know, thank you for that, because we need that. Analog community needs that, and this is a very important job that you do. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah. So again, thank you once again. And guys and girls, so don't forget the ticket, and don't forget to share this episode also. Pass it on to your friends, because it's always helpful. Not because I need the likes or whatever, the subscribers. We all good there. We just need to pass on the message. We need to pass on the message to other people, and potentially not the ones who know what analog astronaut word even means. Just like Jas, like he said, she discovered recently that this thing is existing right now, and people can become analog astronauts through either being part of the community and going to analog stations and many more. I mean, it's a really, really interesting subject, and we need more people on board with that. So make sure to do that. And again, thank you everybody for watching or listening. I'll see you very soon. Thanks again.